Hey dreamers. Hope you're having a good day so far. Of course, Stuffy's come to join me because I've started talking. Hi. What else is new, huh? You coming up? We're on video. This week my theme is emotion. It comes from the Major Arcana card Strength, number 11. And the card talks about strength being mastery over emotion by not letting emotions rule you, but to use them as signals. Aren't you cozy? Look at you. So, yeah, I've been trying to think about what my understanding of emotion is. And the best answer I can come up with is that emotions are the ways that our body signals to us what's going on in our experience. And they get triggered by something, usually. And one thing that I've been trying to figure out over the many, many years that I've been living is why people have such different emotional responses to the same situation. Now, part of that is that I realized that, okay, not everyone is having the exact same experience, even if they're in the same room as something that happens. But the experience reminds them of something from their life, which causes that emotional response. The trouble with most conflict, I guess, that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is that it's coming from a place of being emotionally or emotionally dysregulated, nervous system dysregulation, where you're in fight or flight mode, which makes you defensive and usually escalates things rather than de-escalates them. And this is something I've been trying to notice in my day-to-day. I've been doing a lot of meditation. I say a lot. I've been doing some meditation. What's up? I've been doing some meditation to help notice the bodily sensations because I don't necessarily feel emotions the same way that I see other people feeling them. Oh, are you cozy? At least that's what it feels like in my experience. I generally feel a lot of joy in the day-to-day. But I also feel a lot of anxiety, usually. And I think that's because I spend so much time kind of living in the future a little bit, or at least living a bit further ahead of where I actually am. So that's why meditation has helped to kind of bring back to the present, because it removes a lot of the anxieties, or at least the feelings and worries that come with it. It's a tricky topic to talk about because I don't really know where to start or where to go with it. Mm. You know, in the past, I guess always, I always put emotional responses down to particular events because I would be able to pinpoint exactly what is the triggering thing that has caused a response in some way. But I haven't, or I guess I didn't have enough knowledge on how to deal with that answer. You know, because it would always come back to, I suppose, trying to correct other people's behaviors. If someone did something that made me frustrated or angry or crossed a boundary or whatever like that, my correction would always go to, you need to do something different. But it wasn't until recently where I took a step back a little bit and thought, okay, well, why was I reacting so heavily to this thing that is quite small? And I suppose there's a lot going on. The small things are usually either representing a larger problem or they are just another step in a pattern of behavior, which is why they can feel so intense, I suppose. You know, if someone keeps doing the same thing over and over, it gets tiring dealing with it. And I do make an effort not to let those bad habits that I fall into show up again. The trouble is, I wasn't always like changing the habit because I wanted to change it, but changing it because of how I would be perceived by other people. You know, and that's probably one of the big reasons that like my people pleaser ness came out. It was trying to change myself to show up as a version that other people would accept. And I thought that's just what we do. That I thought that's just what people do because that's what I saw all around me. You know, people would change their behavior in front of you, but then behind your back, they're just themselves. They're still doing the same bad things. I suppose the difference that I noticed for myself is that the behaviors that I was told were bad were not necessarily bad things. You know, if I think a lot of this comes down to neurodivergence as well, in that me being myself is inherently wrong. How did I get onto this from talking about emotion? Hmm. I suppose in a way there's a lot of emotion that comes with even realizing those slight nuances because I know that the things I'm changing or the behavior that I'm altering is not hurting people. It's not damaging people, maybe other than myself. But I'm also don't feel like I'm totally not myself in those moments. In when I correct behavior for people, it's because I want to also be a better person. Um, I suppose there's probably been times where that change has been maybe not for the right reasons, or maybe coming from a place of looking for safety and security. I'm not sure. And it's been a tough topic to talk about in my content this week because I don't really know what points I want to make. I was writing my article for LinkedIn and I got to the end of it and I looked back over it and I was thinking there's something missing here, but I don't quite know what it is. And I think a lot of it was that I had spent so long writing the article. I think it was 2.5 hours. And maybe the last half an hour, 45 minutes or so were maybe not the most productive because I was going back reading it, trying to figure out what I wanted to fix about it. And so I said, I'm going to leave it until today. I'll go back over today with fresh eyes and see if I can like get that point across. And I went to ChatGPT to help just to get some ideas for what I think it might be missing. And there are a couple of things it noted, and I was like, okay, well, this just feels like correction for um, I don't know, writing style or something. I'm not sure, but there was one comment that did stand out to me, which was about making or bringing the physical sensations into the article because I was talking about emotional topics. And I was thinking, okay, well, I don't really know what the physical sensations are. I know what happened. I told the story in the article about when I was 2 months into my very first like adult job that my grandmother passed away and I was trying to keep calm and collected enough to make my plan for getting home. And so that involved like, okay, what work do I have? How can I hand this over to someone? I need to go find my boss to tell her that I'm leaving to go home and that I'll be like gone for the week or whatever. And when I went into the meeting with her, to do that handover and like before I left the office, I remember saying, I need to get through this stuff first because otherwise I won't be able to when I actually explain what's going on. So I went through the work stuff. There really wasn't that much, but I remember apologizing in advance, being like, I'll probably cry trying to say this. And then as I was getting the words out that my grandmother had passed away, I don't even know if I finished the sentence. I just started crying. Like full on like bawling. But I don't really remember what that felt like to then put that into the article, you know? Probably because I wasn't paying attention to that in the moment. I was paying attention to like trying to get through things and I wasn't in the moment like feeling the feelings. And I guess that happens a lot with crisis mode is I go into survival and I'm like, okay, well, this is the situation. This is what I need to do. I need to have my plan so I can follow my plan. And then, like, as long as I have that basic plan, I'll be fine. So, my plan was on that day to, like, make sure everything was in a place to hand it over, tell my boss I was leaving, leave, go home, go to the bus station, get on the bus. And then once I was on the bus, that was my like end point. I was like, once I'm on the bus, I'm fine. Because when the bus arrives, my parents will pick me up from the station, and everything after that then will be, you know, I'll just be following everyone else's plan so I can then I'll be free to be emotional. And it's tricky because there's a lot of times where that strategy is the right strategy. You know, when you have a tense moment with someone and you feel like the brink of an argument is about to break out, then that's when you hold back and you leave the situation and you don't let it escalate that much. And you know, in one sense, it could be that my ability to hold back those emotions is a strength, I suppose. But it's tough because it's easy to fall into the trap of always doing that. You know, not wanting to have a difficult conversation because you know that it will be difficult and uncomfortable, so you don't have it. But instead, those feelings just sit inside and eat away at you, and it becomes a bigger issue over time. So I suppose the question is like, when do you employ that skill of emotional mastery and like holding things in enough that you can get through what you're dealing with, so that you can have the breakaway moment later. I don't want to say breakdown or breakthrough, but like when you get to a space where you can feel those feelings. And I don't know really if I gave myself the space to do that when it came to my grandmother's passing. Hmm. I don't really remember, but I feel like I must have had my fill to a degree. I don't really know. It's difficult. It's I suppose it's impossible to know really. Uh, and that's the tricky things with emotions is because they cloud the way that you think, particularly when they're very intense. If I'm watching a sad movie, it seeps in and it's like, okay, my life is sad and like this person's life is sad and oh my God, there's so much sadness in the world. You absorb that. But then after the movie, I'm like, I kind of have that done with and I will move on to the next thing. So one of the reasons I like movies so much is because it's a fixed period of time where you get a story, you get a whole emotional arc for characters as well, and it's an entire experience. Ooh. You know, the places where I feel a lot of emotion and joy are in my hobbies. And often when I'm watching movies or a TV show or playing a game or something, I think of things I want to share online. We watched The Family Stone recently, which is 20 years old. Um, Seems to be renowned as a horrible Christmas movie. And we watched it, and of course, there's people saying, "Oh, Meredith is awful to the family," but the family is awful to her as well. Like very overtly, they just do not like her, and there's no like reasons for it. It's just like, oh, she's different, you know. And I don't want to say I didn't like the movie because there was something about it that I thought was really interesting. I immediately read Meredith as just being autistic because I could totally see exactly where she was coming from with everything that she was saying, even the way that she was behaving as well. And I was like, oh, okay, so if she is autistic, that explains like the entire plot of the movie, basically. She's trying to bend over backwards, trying for people to like her, and others are saying, you don't need to try, just be yourself. But that doesn't work because when she's being herself, people hate her, thinking that she's a bitch. And like I said it to my husband was making comments about like, oh yeah, she is a bitch. And I mentioned to him about her being autistic, and he was like, um, hmm, okay, interesting idea. We didn't really talk about it anymore after that, but once it was in my mind, that's all I could see, I suppose. And that's the interesting thing is we see what we want to see. You know, if you see someone as a bitch, they're going to be a bitch. Because every little thing they do, you're concocting a story about how they're being a bitch. But when you change the story, when you change the story, the experience changes as well. You know, this is where this is how you shift your mindset is like realizing that the stories you're telling yourself about other people are not necessarily the right stories. And I suppose the question is like, what is the right story? I'm just looking at your comment. Can you react to this song God's Menu by Stray Kids? Like listen to it, you mean? I've taken a note about it there. I must look it up. The stories that we tell ourselves about the world are just stories, but they become our version of the truth. But we are not really told that that's what's happening. You know, there's times where I suppose over the years I've been talking to parents, friends, whatever, about situations, and we build a story for what happened, and the other person will like chime in and say, no, it was probably this, or no, it was probably that, or actually, I've got more information to give you more of the story. And so, you know, we're talking about the story, and then eventually, sometimes with stories where they can be a bit like, there's something else going on, but we don't know what it is. Eventually, that piece of information comes out, and you're like, there it is. We figured it out. But I've been wondering, you know, why don't we take that curiosity into everyday life? Because I noticed that in conversations, in private conversations, depending on the feelings you have about the person, you're going to assume positive or negative things. And that's based on patterns of behavior. You know, if someone has routinely been a bully, you're going to assume that they are going to exhibit bullying behavior. But like, why would anyone ever become a bully? It's because they themselves are just repeating the behavior that they experience and see around them. Like, how often do you hear that a bully is just someone who is being bullied? You know, if you're unfairly treated in the workplace and you come home and you bring that energy to your family, it's because you're bullied in the workplace. So now you're like expressing that amongst your family members and being perceived as a bully. When in reality, you are very hurt by what's going on and you don't know how to process that. You know, you're getting triggered at home for the same reasons. If you're being bullied in the workplace because of like doing things wrong or doing things because they're not 100% right in the way that the person telling you expects them to be done, that translates into the home so quickly. And we just like end up triggering ourselves forever. Because at the end of the day, it's not what the other person does or says, it's how you respond to it. You know, when I was in school, I never considered that I was being bullied. I experienced bullying behavior, but I never said that I was being bullied, like repetitively or targeted. Because certain people were just kind of bullies to everyone. So it was much easier for me to discount that as being something they have to deal with. And so because of that, I never took any of it personally. And because I didn't take any of it personally, I didn't respond to it. And because I didn't respond to it, I never felt ostracized by a bully. And this isn't to say that, you know, this isn't to victim blame and say that victims are at fault. But in my circumstance, the victim was the bully and everyone else was just like collateral damage. There was no targeted bullying. It was all very general and it wasn't directed anywhere. So I suppose even just that pattern showed me, okay, well, this isn't about me. You know, you're saying things that are completely untrue about me, which means that you don't know me. You're not targeting me. If you were targeting me, you would find out what are the things that would hurt me. But no, you're just throwing out these things because they're a reflection of what your experience is. And I suppose it was a good lesson in some ways to see that bullying isn't necessarily about the victim. But then there's other people that I've interacted with who wouldn't like necessarily fall under that title of bully. Well, at least that's not what I would have said. But when I think back to school and I see, okay, so I'm thinking of like people who are manipulative, who treat you one way when you're in the room and you're like working with them, and then treat you a different way when you disagree with them. Because at that point it becomes transactional, that you only have meaning in the relationship when you're of value to the other person. And that's a very different kind of bullying, because it's a lot more confusing, because you have good times and you have bad times and you're wondering, like, why are the bad times there at all? It doesn't make sense. When you go looking for support from this person and they don't give it to you, but you're there to support them, does it, are you falling into dealing with narcissism, or is it just human behavior that is acceptable to a degree? I don't know, like, where do you draw the lines between these things? You know, is it just their personality? Oh, they're like that with everyone. Okay, what's the common denominator then? Is it only manipulation when you find out enough of the facts to look at it objectively and say, oh, yeah, they did this, they did that, they did the other thing, that pattern is manipulative, blah, blah, blah. Is that when it becomes manipulation? And what about when you point these things out to them, they say, no, that didn't happen? Is that gaslighting? At the end of the day, you can't really be sure what is going on inside someone else's head. You can only go based on their behavior. But what you can do with that is find a story that keeps you safe and regulated. So coming back to the bullying thing, it's not about me if someone is trying to manipulate me. That's a them thing. All I can do is, like, keep my boundaries in place to not give myself over to those practices, I suppose. And it's tough because when you feel betrayed by another person like that, it feels like a personal betrayal, that, oh, I should have seen it coming, or I should have recognized this pattern, or I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have given them a 14th chance. And it's tough because, you want to be a good person who helps others, but you don't want to be taken advantage of, and you don't want to get hurt. So how do you sort through all of that? I find on some of these videos that I don't really know where I'm going with what I'm talking about, so I have a lot of pauses, and I suppose I am anxious or concerned about that fact. But that's partly why I'm doing these videos, is to talk about a topic for an extended period of time and see what comes up. And even when I talk about that, I can feel the like weight in my chest and the discomfort of feeling like I'm not showing up the best way that I want to. And that in itself is probably contributing to the like broken train of thought, the slower pace of talking. All I want to do at the moment is just like take a few minutes to relax. I think talking about these topics is bringing up the doubts and fears that I have just about myself, I suppose. And I think some of it is because when I talk about these situations of people being manipulative and all these other things, and the bullies and whatever, there's a certain part of me there that is wondering, am I afraid of being manipulative? Is that why I feel betrayed by it? I guess this is where I have to try and separate things because by realizing that my responses to other people are because of something in me that is reacting to the environment, then other people's responses to me are things that are happening in their environment. So their snippet of my behavior, my response, my reaction, I can know it's not intentionally manipulative, but if it comes across as manipulative, then I get defensive over that if the other person feels like it is manipulative. And that's what causes this like discontent between me and another person. And I guess that's been something I've been dealing with my whole life is having my actions and the way that I say things be interpreted by other people as intentionally hurtful. And yeah, I suppose there's an element that, oh, I see that now you think of me as a hurtful person. Hey, Adriana, how are you? Hmm. Interesting thought. And I temper my behavior because I don't want people to think about me in a particular way. Something I've always been doing, I suppose. But now it's affecting, I suppose, the more that I work on that in my personal life, the more that I'm sort of uncovering how it's showing up in my work life as well. Because I've been struggling for a long, long time about how I present myself in a work context without misrepresenting myself. But I think sometimes that self awareness is exactly the thing that stops me from showing up as the person that the other person wants to see. And it's such a difficult line to walk because I don't want to show up as a different person just to be liked. But I realize that there's also, I suppose, there's this game that you play when you go into interviews like everything's amazing, nothing could be better. And I think back at all the interviews that I did, the one, really, the only one interview that I've done that I've got a job from was because it was based on talking about your strengths and like what you're good at. And it wasn't trying to pick apart the entire story of you. There's other interviews that I did where uh, basically I was backed into corners with questions and I was like, I don't know what you're looking for from me. And like there are lessons to be taken from all of those. There was one I did an assessment center, so there was maybe, I don't know, I'm going to say 15 people altogether doing it. We each had an individual interview. We had a case study and then a group presentation or a group discussion and then individual presentations. And for the individual presentation, one of the last things was we had to like analyze all this information and like pull out three positives, three negatives, or come up with three of each. And when it came to the presentation, like I was running out of time, so I did two and two. And like that was the main thing that I was pulled up for. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Because I hadn't been in a context of like assessing this kind of information. And when like, I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I didn't get the job. But what was annoying was they told me I was like the first reserve or whatever. I was like, okay, that's not actually going to help me because you're not giving me the job. But what I found interesting was that they preferred to mark me down because of the two positives and two negatives instead of three of each, disregarding all of the other parts of the interview that I sailed through so well. And I'm just thinking, like, I could have put down anything for two and two, or sorry, for three and three. I don't think it mattered because what they were judging was not the critical thinking behind it. They were judging the criteria that you need three and three. But my rationale was, well, actually, I'd rather do two and two and have them be good points than to just throw out three random things that make no difference. Because at least I can stand behind my decision. And so, like, what I took away from it was, yeah, okay, there's the brief of three positives, three negatives. Next time that comes up, I'll make an effort to get to those, to tick off all of those things while trying to stay true to myself. And for all I know, the other people that like got the jobs are were perfect in all the other ways, and they got their three positives and three negatives. But it was that interview where I realized, okay, these are so picky down to the day. If you don't show up well on the day, it's really tough to like show up as your best. So I learned a lot from that interview. And I definitely felt frustrated by the whole thing. And I think a lot of that frustration came from like when I was questioned about why I didn't do three positives and three negatives and I only did two of each, is because I said, well, I wanted to try and strike a balance and I wanted to make sure I was putting down points that I really stood behind and could explain. And it felt like that answer was kind of dismissed a little bit because they were like, yeah, but you were asked to do three and three. And there certainly is an element of, okay, well, I can be asked to do this thing, but if I don't think that thing is actually the right size for the project or whatever, I'm going to change it. I hear these voices in my head saying, yeah, but you're supposed to just do what you're told. You're going into an office, you're supposed to listen to your boss and do what your boss says. To a degree. Like, we don't just do everything our boss tells us to do because they're our boss. Use some discernment. Like, your boss is not a perfect person, they're human. It's like when you ever get, when you get to that day that you realize, oh, my parents are only human, they don't know everything. But for so much of our early lives, we're we're conditioned to believe that our parents know everything. I suppose when I do look back on all of the interviews that I've done, and like these are 10 or more years ago, but they all stuck with me in some way. There was one where, I was talking about my past job or a difficult situation or whatever, and I was talking about about working in a pub. And I was saying, yeah, it was really awful because like I wasn't getting any training. I wasn't um like appreciated for the work that I was doing and all these things. And I said like that was really difficult, and I kind of just hunkered down and got through it and said, look, it'll be a few weeks and I'll go home and I'll go back to college and I'll be fine. And the feedback from that one was your interview was great, except the question about your like former employer. You really shouldn't be talking so negatively about a former employer. And I was thinking, you have no idea what I went through in that job. Like there was bullying, there was homophobic bullying there, which is not on my CV. But like, you asked me a question about a difficult situation. I'm going to tell my truth. And like what it said to me was, oh, we don't want you because if you ever leave, you'll talk bad about us. That's all I could hear when they were saying, don't talk bad about your employer. Now, I don't know how much of that is me projecting versus a HR person being like, no, it's not professional. But why is it not professional? It's not professional because you're not supposed to talk about negativity. Like, I don't know at what point do you draw the line between projection and, nah, this is what's actually going on. Each of the interviews that I've done, my neurodivergence has shown up in a particular way in each of them, I suppose. And it's quite stark when I take that lens and put it over the experience. Because 10 years ago, I didn't know that that was the answer. So, like with the, difficult moment with a former employer, that was based on, I don't know, maybe this injustice thing. Uh, the previous interview I talked about, the assessment center, I'm not sure what to put it down to, but I think, wanting quality over quantity was important. Not, doing things just because you're told to do them, but doing them because it's the best you can do. Another interview I did, I actually cannot remember a single thing about the interview except this one question because we spent what felt like 20 minutes on it. And it was a scenario presented to me. You're going up to this meeting room. You're in the elevator with your boss. You're presenting a report to a client. And in the elevator, you notice that like the final numbers on the last page of the report are wrong. What do you do? I said, okay, well, if I noticed they were wrong on the last page, like just flicking through it, I could probably correct them, like get my calculator out and fix them. Like, no, no, no. It's more complicated than that. You can't like fix it based on the last page. Like, okay. Then how did I know it was wrong? Oh, you just knew looking at it that it was wrong. Okay. Well, it wouldn't have got that far for it to be wrong. Because if I noticed it like that in the elevator, I would have noticed it days before when I was like doing my last read throughs. They were like, "Oh no, you didn't pick it up then." Okay. Um, get my boss to check the numbers. Oh no, he can't do that either. Okay. Go into the meeting and say that we don't have the stuff ready yet. That like it'll be a few days. That we need to like fix some stuff. Oh, you can't do that because like you're supposed to have it done today. Like, okay. This went on for what felt like 20 minutes. And what was annoying was they came back to this answer of saying basically, oh, we need more information from you so that we can like fill in some of the gaps and bring it back to the team and we'll get like a right answer for you. And I was like, okay, you're setting up this elaborate hypothetical scenario that would never come up to see if my default response was to lie. That's all it was. And like I remember in the middle of those conversations when they were pushing me to like give a different answer, there was a point where I just looked at them and I started laughing. I was like, I really don't know what you're looking for here. And that kind of told me everything I needed to know, you know? Because by layering in all of these assumptions to the situation, you're looking for a very particular answer. You're not actually looking for people who can work well, who can think for themselves. You're looking for someone who will just do what is expected of them, which means that you're going to teach them that if things are wrong, that they have to hide it some way and like find a fluffy way around it. It's not how I work. You know, there's another one. I don't know how I got onto talking about my interviews. There was another interview where I went for went for the job interview. I remember this like really vividly because of the circumstance around it. So I went to this interview. It was at 4 o'clock. I travelled to Dublin with my grandmother, and we had planned that like I would do the interview at 4. It would be half an hour. Finish at 4:30. I get the train at 5:30, or we get the train at 5:30 together. So 4 o'clock, I was in the office and I was sitting down, and I had gone to reception and said, "Oh, I'm here for the interview." Sitting there waiting, 4:15, nothing. I was like, okay, need to get this going. 4:20, and the receptionist came over to me and said, "Oh, your interview's in a different building." Like, what do you mean? You're in the wrong office. I took a second and I was like, thinking to myself, like, I'm not in the wrong office. Took out my phone, looked at the email that I had, looked at the address, and was like, this is the address, right? Oh, yeah, that's for this office, but that's not where your interview is. I was like, this is the email that says my interview is here. Yeah, but you're in the wrong building. No, girl. You've organized the interview in the wrong place. Somewhere, some person in your company has given me the wrong information. I'm not in the wrong place. So I was sent off to the other building, just like 5 minutes away. Wasn't that far, but still, I got into the building and they were like, "Oh, you're late for your interview." I was like, "Excuse me?" I was at the right place at the right time, waiting. It's been 20 minutes. Did the receptionist not tell you what happened? Oh, she said you went to the wrong building. I was in the place that I was told to be. Okay, well, you're late for this interview. I had already checked out of the interview when the receptionist said I was in the wrong place. But anyway, I went and did it, and I don't remember what we really talked about, but they were saying, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And I changed from my original train of thought or my planned discussion of whatever thing the job was for, and said, "You know what? I want to be an actuary." And I just started talking about like what I actually wanted to do. And they were like, okay, not really place for that here. And I left that interview and I was like, they're not going to give me the job, but I don't want to work there. If this is how they treat a graduate who hasn't ever been to the office before, how the hell do they treat their employees? I honestly got to a point in the interview where I was like, I need to leave. I've got a train. And I just about got the train that day. Oh, I think I was talking about these because they were so emotionally heavy as I was going through them. Hey Tam, my day job is building a business, I suppose. doing lots of little things to build that business. I was talking about job interviews that I'd done before, and they were mostly jobs for data analytics. I guess job interviews are one of those places where you can really see whether you fit in somewhere or not. Not on the dole anymore. Um, so I'm still trying to figure out the words for this business, but basically, I want to help people achieve their dreams and find ways that they can get there themselves because that's what I wanted to do. So I sat down and said, right, if I can figure this out for myself, I can make it something that I can share with other people. And my dream reality would be to make it in such a way that it becomes a business that I can follow through on for years to come, where I am my own boss, I am doing work that I enjoy, I am working with people that I like. So that's the dream job. That's the dream business. And so all of this stuff that I'm doing on social media at the moment is trying to build my voice pretty much so that I can find out, what's the authentic version of myself. Because for so long I ended up holding so much of it back because I was fitting into other people's boxes. Because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. So I've got a lot of dreams, which has been tough to kind of like separate them out into different things. But Kiki Dreams Big, the name I have for this account and the name that I'm using for my stuff, is basically like my dream life. So business is one part of that, but the other parts of life come into it as well. My hobbies, my interests, the people I'm around, my family, traveling, whatever, any life things. Because I think that we should be able to build our dream life using all of these pieces. We don't have to, you know, suffer being around the wrong people just because we're in a job that is stable and we can make money. We can get out of that particular situation and make money in other ways and be far more fulfilled. We don't always have that support to do that, though. When I left my job last year, I've been kind of planning it for a while, but I also had a lot of savings that I was kind of saving for and didn't have anything to put them towards. So I've been living on my savings, which is the real answer, and it doesn't. I suppose it's not that helpful if you don't have savings. Um, but it's the type of thing that I have been. Sorry. Okay, it was just a package. I thought sometimes it might be someone that needs signature sign off. Yeah, to be honest, I have been kind of dealing with the survival bit for a while because I'm trying to figure out how to turn all of this into an income of some kind. Yeah, deposits for houses are it's really difficult these days to build a deposit. And then especially if you're unemployed, because like that just makes it impossible. Like there's no pathway to go from unemployment to buying a house. The only pathway is get a job and work for X number of years and live frugally. And like it's pretty impossible for most people. Not because there's anything wrong with the individuals, but because the system is just broken. It's so broken. Like my big dream for this business would be that eventually at some point becomes big enough that I can just like give money away to people, you know? Because the biggest thing that I've learned over the last 6 months of doing Kiki Dreams Big is that the only way you can show up for yourself is when you're not in survival mode. And there's nothing worse than living month to month, if even, like struggling to pay your rent. How could there be anything more survival mode than that? You know, I'm at a place where I can go to the shop and like buy my groceries and I don't need to worry about needing to pay for them. But there have been times in my life where I didn't have money and I was stuck. And it's awful, but ultimately I wasn't in a place where I was like almost homeless. You know, I still had people around me who would be supportive and helpful. But even just feeling like I was in that position of being vulnerable was very tough. Hi, Marius, what's up? I'm actually coming up on my hour, so I was going to finish my live shortly.
Shak Shamash.
Hello.
How are you, Kiki? I speak before with you a long time ago now.
Yeah,
How you keep?
I'm not too bad. I'm uh had a pretty heavy live talking about a few different things, so I'm going to take a rest after I finish up with
Yeah, a few times see you speak deep
yeah.
thinkings. And nice think about this, and people speak too. Nice topic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How have you been?
Yeah, not too bad. I break from my wife now, and I living with man now because I tell my wife I buy, and
Yeah,
big speak and no happy, and we separate now, and little by little happy now.
yeah,
And Christmas will be okay, I think, for me.
yeah.
I don't know for her, but I happy now, and I I tell friends about I buy.
Yeah,
And nice friends, and they speak nice words, and happy for me. For I 48 year old man, and my friend now happy and say you happy now. You tell everybody, and wife know now, and live lying anymore about sexuality. And yeah, I think next year will be good for me, and I look forward to 26. Yeah,
yeah. Thanks for coming on and sharing that. It's good to hear that you're happier now. I'm sorry that you had difficult times with that um,
much thanks.
breakup.
And you are a good man, Kiki. You speak nice things, thinkings, and I remember too. You man, what his name? Dini.
Yes,
He
yeah,
speak about his son as well, and nice, nice. You speak, you experience to Dini, and nice, very good man. Yeah.
yeah. Have you any plans for your 2026?
I no plan. I want a relationship to last with
Yes,
a new man. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a good goal to have.
And I will be happy, I think. My wife, long time, she now happy, I'm now happy, and she big woman, yeah, and I always speak. You need helpings, and I need helpings, and
Yeah,
I think next year will be good, and for both, yeah.
yeah. There's only sorry. There's only I suppose one way to go, which is up. It's going to get better next year.
Yes, I think so too. I I go now, and I wish happy Christmas, and
Happy
a
Christmas.
very good and happy New Year for you and husband. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Happy New Year to you and your new partner as well.
Much thank you.
Thanks for
And,
coming on.
we speak again, Kiki. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Nice way to close off my video this week. Okay, I'm going to finish up my live. I've got a few bits I want to do after this conversation. So I will leave it there for today. Thanks for joining, everyone. Keep dreaming.